Hey guys, I didn't want to leave you tonight without putting up a reaction to the Iowa caucus, the first in the nation state that gets to determine the outcome of the nominee for presidency on the Democratic side this year. And there's not much to talk about because it seems that the Democratic Party of Iowa reported that there were quote unquote inconsistencies with the counting or with the returns, and so they've held up giving the returns to the news outlets, and we really don't know where it stands. The best that we could do was I looked at some CNN, MSNBC polling tonight. Those were the channels that I watched the coverage on, and I think MSNBC had like some entrance polls, and it showed that Bernie Sanders was, I don't know if ahead in total. He was definitely among the top two. I think MSNBC, they always do whatever they can to minimize his support. So they broke it down male, female. Bernie Sanders was number one amongst men. He was number two amongst women with Pete Buttigieg. And I think that's the big takeaway or big surprise. Or I don't know if it's a surprise, but the big takeaway going from tonight was that it seems to have been Pete Buttigieg and Bernie Sanders' night. I'm inclined to think that Bernie Sanders did pretty well, but we won't know until the actual numbers come out. But they didn't. I'm not sure if they touched too much upon this on the news outlets. I think there was a bit of it from MSNBC, but it does smell a little fishy. Like, why did they not have the results right away? They're going first. This is a big deal to Iowa voters, caucusers, and they weren't prepared to give the goods to the country that was waiting to see what the outcome was. So a lot of criticism kind of went into Iowa saying, oh, it's a mostly white state. It's not representative of the demographic of the United States. Why do they get to decide first? Being that the outcome determines how much donors give to the campaigns. And, it seems tonight that with this lack of transparency, the inability to give the results right away, that there was some upset feelings, I guess, even within the establishment. Chris Matthews was like, they should basically have their shit together. And Chris Matthews, he's a guy like, all he does, he talks about Bobby Kennedy, Tip O'Neill, these kind of political figures from yesteryear. He's in love with the establishment. So he's an establishment guy saying, hey, you should have had your shit together with this. What it does, I'm not sure if you guys know this already, but I volunteer for Bernie Sanders. I've been up to New Hampshire. I've knocked on doors. I've done the work with the campaign to tell people why I support him, trying to get people out to the polls. But what this does smell of when I'm texting my friends, other friends who do support Bernie Sanders, a lot of us are already very keen to the idea that the Democratic National Committee does not want Bernie Sanders to win, so they're willing to do basically anything to make sure he doesn't get the nomination, or to and doing they're willing to do anything not to give him any steam going forward, because there is a lot of momentum from this particular result going into New Hampshire, then going into South Carolina, Nevada, and then Super Tuesday and the rest of the country. And so those of us within the movement, we we kind of think that they're kind of setting this up so that Bernie didn't have his rallying cry tonight. Here's the thing: we're within the movement. We are, I guess, we're so used to losing or to not getting the things that we want in politics. And I've been voting since 2004. But we're so used to just not getting the things that we want that we're kind of resigned to this idea that maybe we'll never get it. So even with poll numbers going into Iowa, we're very cautiously optimistic. Everything has looked great for Bernie Sanders. He surged at the right time. Poll numbers are great. He now led Joe Biden in a national poll. And so going into Iowa, things are set in motion for him to win and to win big. But being that they didn't release the numbers right away, how could he go up and tout a huge victory when the numbers aren't even there? So while he gets up on stage, he obviously has that same cautious optimism. He doesn't want to play his cards wrong. He doesn't want to have cake on his face. Like say he goes up there without the numbers, declares victory, and then it turns out that he didn't really win by as big a margin as he expected, or that he didn't win at all. Both scenarios would look really bad for him, really bad for his campaign. So if this were a conspiracy, definitely works against him to kind of deflate his momentum going forward. The other one that looked really bad in this whole thing was Joe Biden. It doesn't seem, according to the entrance polls into the caucuses, that Joe Biden actually had big numbers. In fact, I think there were some caucus stations, and I don't know what you call that, caucus stations or whatever, caucus centers, but there were some of them that seemed that he didn't have that 15% viability. And even according to like all the polls, it looked like top three were Bernie, Elizabeth, Pete. Bernie, Pete, and then Elizabeth. I think she probably was third in the mix based on the very rough raw data. But then Joe Biden was fourth. So he doesn't look good. I mean, he's trying to run this campaign as the front runner, as a sort of incumbent, if you will. That's the way that he's been acting. And so tonight, without the results, and even with the results, like I don't think he looked good, anyways. The one that looked great was Mayor Pete. He looked fantastic because he got up there and it turns out like the according to the entrance polls that he's number two among a lot of people, and he had his huge crowd there, and just his rhetoric was very much in the sense of like, hey, I won something. And so that was a great moment for him. Let's see how that translates into using it as momentum, even though there weren't any actual figures to support that. And then I saw Elizabeth Warren's, her addressing her supporters, and she also seemed to, I wouldn't say that she was as much as Mayor Pete, but she did give a little bit of a notion of this was a victory for her campaign. So yeah, it's totally anticlimactic. I'm about to go to bed and I'm just like, this is shitty. I wish I knew going forward. Especially you guys, I'm going to be coming back to quite a bit this week because tomorrow is going to be State of the Union, and then after that, there's going to be another Democratic debate in New Hampshire. So there's a lot going on this week, especially. But I forget the point that I was making about that, why I even said that. But anyways, yeah, it was totally anticlimactic, and shame on them for not having their shit together. Just in case you guys were wondering what caucusing is, and like, I was definitely not an expert in this. I'm not an expert by any means, but what happens in Iowa is they don't go and just cast a vote. What they do is at like 6 or 7 p.m., sometime around there, all the voters, they go to caucus. And what that is they go to these centers around the state and even out of state, which was wild to me that like they're having a caucus center in Florida, Arizona. It seemed that they had one in freaking Scotland, and then and then in Paris as well. Like how many Iowans are like specifically living in like Scotland or Paris, which is, it's just crazy to me. Then again, they probably have them there just so that like it's not just Scotland. It's probably like people in England and Ireland. They probably go to Scotland if they want to caucus for Iowa. I digress. But the whole process is they all get together and then they kind of go within the caucus centers. They go to their stations of like which candidates they support, and then they have to like calculate within that hall of like what the percentage is that supports each candidate. And if a candidate is lower than 15%, then they tell those voters, those caucus goers, that hey, you have to choose someone else or leave because your candidate is not viable. And so what ends up being important, which is a good thing, is that second choice is important. I imagine that Andrew Yang or Tulsi Gabbard, even Joe Biden, if Joe Biden wasn't viable in some scenarios, that they end up going to Bernie Sanders, which to me is great. But the other thing is that if you think about like how it's done, the logistics, like not everyone could get off at 6:37 p.m. Like some people work. Like there's things that are open in Iowa. I assume gas stations don't all shut down, or that they're all run by Republicans. So I think that there's some issues with like voter participation with their type of caucusing, and a few other things. So anyways, that's all I got on that. I don't want to go too much into it. I mean, there's not much else to discuss. But yeah, stay tuned for the rest of this week. State of the Union by Donald Trump tomorrow. And then I forget the exact date. I should look it up and let you guys know. But there is a pre-primary debate in New Hampshire. And I think we all want to check it out, especially since they just had the first contest in Iowa. So yeah, check me out at Johnny Jabbour, JohnnyJabbour, on Twitter, on Instagram. Like, comment, subscribe, do what you got to do, and I will talk to you again on Johnny's Jabs. Peace.